Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Business Exchange Southwest Charity Conference and Expo 2021 in partnership with Milstead Langdon Accountants and Stone King Law. We're on day 3 of the week-long conference, and this evening we've got the lovely Robin Worrall from Rednine Design Brand based in Wiltshire, and Robin's going to be telling us how to build your best brand story. Robin, the stage is yours. I will leave you to tell us how to build the best brand.
Thank you so much, Anita. We've just been talking backstage of gliders and pheasants and anything really. So yeah, it's lovely to be with you all. I would love to be able to see all your smiley faces. I'm sure you're all sat there with coffees and wines and anything really. I hope you've got big bags of snacks, and I really appreciate that it's quite late in the day, but hopefully that's kind of quite a good thing really. So we can kind of round off the day with a nice chit chat about charities, and as Anita says, how to build your best brand story. So I hope you've all been enjoying the expo. I had a little look around today, and all being it virtual, I thought it was a brilliantly professional put together conference. I'm not quite sure what the correct word for it is when it's virtual, but yeah, some great charities on there, and some brilliant stands. So if you haven't had a look already, I certainly suggest you go and have a look. So just to introduce myself, I'm Robin, as Anita said, and I have a design and brand consultancy, and we basically work with a range of charities, but also have worked in the sort of startup and international brand sphere as well. So well versed in everything and anything brand. I mean, put me in an environment where I can talk brand, and I can probably talk on for days. Nervous at the moment, but I'm sure as I get into this, that those nerves will dissipate a little bit, and we'll move on. So these are just a few of the brands, some of the stories that we've helped bring to life. Charlie Waller and cerebral palsy in particular, I had the pleasure of working with throughout lockdown. In fact, cerebral palsy was designed and briefed and was fully executed just prior to lockdown, and then they had the nervous moment of thinking that they probably shouldn't launch. But I worked very closely with Digital Wonderlab, who I know have been doing some talks today and throughout the expo, and they brought to life the brand digitally, and I helped to rebrand them from Bobath, which is what they were before. And Charlie Waller was actually born completely in lockdown, so everything was done virtually, all the interviews, all of the research, all of the design work, all the presentations. So that one I'm particularly proud of, and they've just done such an incredible job bringing to life who they are and what they stand for. So a little bit about them later on in the presentation, but that's just a mix of those that I've worked on, and I'm immensely proud and humbled to be part of their creative team. So Anita Ruddock, who was the founder of Body Shop, said this many years ago. She founded the Body Shop in 1976, and I think it kind of stands for everything really about a brand. A brand is not a physical entity. It's born from graphic assets, color palettes, typography, but also tone of voice and feeling, and it's something that lives basically in the mind of others. So once you start to engage with your audience and they start to understand who you are and what you do, then if they can relate to you, they will remember you and they will retell your story. And that's really how a brand grows in its kind of simplest format. So relate, remember, retell is something that I put together and I use daily with all the brands that I work with. And it's something I kind of invite you to do really, is to just go back to your why and think about why you exist, why you were set up, what your purpose is, what your mission is, and who do you relate to. It's not everybody. It will be a certain type of person, a certain personality, a certain need, and it'll also be relevant to kind of how you fit into their lifestyle as well. So there'll be different connections that you'll create with those individuals, and building on those will help them to remember who you are. and then they will take that story and retell it. I would sort of use the analogy of, imagine a new restaurant that arrives on the high street, and you walk down the street, you see the signs outside. Not everybody will relate to it. Not everybody will think, oh, that looks like a good place. I'm interested, I'm intrigued by that. There will have been visual cues that will guide you and will help you relate to that restaurant. And then when you go in, it's not just about the food. It's not just about what you're served. It's about how you're served. It's the ambiance. It's the temperature. It's the caliber of how the waiting staff greet you, and what they say, how they say it, how you're guided to your table. All of those things create that whole experience. You remember that, and then you take that back to your family and your friends, and you tell others. You may go onto social media and you may shout out about how brilliant it was, because if you've loved something, generally you kind of want to share it, and you want others to share that experience too. And equally, if it's something that's not particularly wonderful, then you may choose to also kind of promote that or explain that. So it's just worth remembering kind of how you fit into people's lives, and what and how that need that you service, how you fulfill that. So as I said, think about why your charity was created. With Charlie Waller, when we went through all of the workshops with them, we went right back to the beginning and just remembered that it was the unfortunate tragedy of a family's son, Charlie, actually taking his own life, and they vowed that they didn't want that pain to be felt by any other, or as few other families as possible. So that was really the start of what they put together. So let's just think about what your story is. And it should really encompass lots of things. It should have highs and lows. It should have light and shade. There's three things that I was taught with social media in particular, is to always remember to educate, to inspire, and to entertain. So your story should really encompass all of those three attributes on different levels and on different days and on within different media. So think about how you communicate digitally, how you communicate verbally, how you communicate in person, and how you communicate virtually, and all of that starts to come in and appeal to the heart just as well as the head. Don't always feel that you've got to just transmit all of your factual information. It's important as well to also be on receive, and to listen to your audience, and to think about what they need, or kind of embrace what their requirements might be, or what their feedback might be to what you're presenting. Certain fundraising avenues may go a certain way, and I always think it's always important to kind of listen to how people connect with those initiatives, and what their feedback might be, that see what they're saying out on social media. So that again is that sort of retell element. And again, I love an analogy. So another little sort of story, or a little sort of visual interpretation of what I'm kind of talking about here, is think about when you go to a party and you may be new to that group of people, and sort of enter through the door, and you have a little look around, and you find somebody that you connect with, somebody that you think you might relate to, somebody that you think you've got an attraction to. So you go over and you start to tell your story, and it generally starts with your name. So hi, who are you? And then second question generally is around about, so what do you do? And at that point, you kind of want to keep your story quite brief. You want to keep it in sort of broad brushstrokes, and that's maybe the sort of opening level of your website, or your newsletter, or your I'm going to apologize because we've got builders and they're filling their bucket, but that's all part of life. So apologies if there's a bit of noise disruption in the background, but shows that this is real. So yeah, just think about how you tell your story, and as you get more intimate with your audience, as they get to know you more and more, that's when you can start to deliver more and more information. That's when you can start to share more and more. So you don't want to be giving the whole story up front. You probably heard the sort of the boilerplate kind of scenario where you just want a very short 10, 15 word kind of scenario of who you are and what you do. So your whole story really wants to kind of embrace all of those sort of attributes. So knowing your audience, knowing how you can connect is really the sort of key to how you can kind of keep your story live. So not literally, but think bullet points, think subheads, and think different ways that people can kind of navigate what you have to tell them. So the information that you have will be very connected to you. It will be very personal and you'll know it inside out, but you need to sit in the chair of your audience. You need to sit on the other side of the table and kind of look back at yourself and really try to kind of see yourself in a new light, and try to remove all preconceptions of what you know, because this is all going to be new to your audience and they need to really be guided through the process. Some of them will want to watch the information, some of them want to read the information, and some might just want to listen. So think podcasts, think video, think newsletter, think white papers, think social media posts. If you can take the same information and you can deliver it in a variety of different ways, then again, that allows your audience kind of those connection points, those contact points to take in that information and take it in at the level that they want to. They may be finding out what you're up to back in the days on the bus or on the train on the way into work, or they may be doing it on a short break from their desk. Clearly everybody's using computers and sat kind of using digital far more through lockdown. So think of the different ways that they can kind of access that information, and just give your audience the opportunity to kind of dip in and dip out of what you need to tell them, or what you would like them to know about who you are and what you do and what's coming up next. So clearly we're human and we seek relationships and we seek connections. We love connections. We love being able to say, oh, I went there, I done that, I remember that, oh, I was born down the road from there. So people like that, to kind of join the dots up. They like to have relevance, to place something in a context. And when you do that, all of these connections then live in the minds of others. And that's back to what I was saying with Anita Ruddock. That's where your brand now starts to kind of find its own sort of lifeblood, and it really starts to sort of grow into a far more complete story. And that's like also where you kind of add value to their lives as well, because if you know what their need is, and as a charity you answer that need, then that's when the connection all starts to grow and that community starts to grow. And with Cerebral Palsy Cymru and with Charlie Waller as well, they have a very clear, distinct vision of what services they offer, what resources they have, and that it's all based on evidence and fact, and therefore they can put their hand on the heart and really sort of take that information out to their audience. It's also worth remembering that you can't be everything to everybody. With a lot of individual charities that I've worked with, I've always suggested that they start with a niche, and they really sort of home in on a very tight group of people, saturate them, give them everything that they could possibly wish for, be the ultimate service provider for them. And then as that grows, as then revenue comes in, or funding, or whatever it needs to be to allow growth, further growth, volunteers joining, then the charity can expand with that growth, rather than trying to be kind of all-encompassing. Cerebral Palsy Cymru in particular, and clearly in their name, they deal with anybody that's affected by cerebral palsy, but they are just in Wales. So they've got a very clear sort of geographical sort of area that they cover, and that kind of then helps them to sort of consolidate and to concentrate what they do and who they do it for. So another thing to kind of consider as you're kind of putting all this together is to build your own path as well. You don't have to follow what others are doing, and I read something the other day, if you compare with others, it only leads to disappointment, because you'll never kind of match exactly what they're doing, but you really shouldn't be either. Charlie Waller, the mental health charity that I've been mentioning, their story is so personal and so particular to them, and the way that they approach mental health, which is clearly an extremely high profile kind of subject of a lot of conversations at the moment and a lot of concern. Their take on it comes from a family that were affected by, as I said, a dreadful tragedy, and from that comes a passion and a need and an urge to prevent that from happening again. So their journey forward is very particular, and they've had to carve their own path. They've had to find their own way. And I said to them, you know, if the path ahead doesn't look clear and you're having to sort of cut through the sort of the undergrowth, and there's no signposting and there's no street lamps, then it means nobody's trodden that path before, which is a good thing, because then you're carving out your own journey. And as long as you signpost it correctly and you signpost it well, then everybody that follows behind you will be able to be guided by you and can kind of move themselves forward. So don't be shy of a difficult journey, and don't be kind of put off by that. And that is all part of sort of being maybe disruptive, and if that's a word that you kind of embrace or challenged, to be able to kind of take yourself forward. And always embrace your failings. Always look to the mistakes and learn from them. I'm sure, you know, many of you kind of have that sort of mentality, but I think it's really important to understand that vulnerability in a brand is a really, really endearing quality. It's something that people do feel very connected to. And if you are seen to try something and fail, but you gave it your all, then something in our human nature actually endears us to that that situation, and kind of pat you on the back for kind of giving it a go. Get up, learn from what you did, and then try to make adjustments or improvements, or if it's something that's never going to really work, then pass it by. But let's face it, we've all been through a pretty tough time of late, and I think certainly working with the charities that I've been working with, you can't stick to how you used to do it. You really do need to kind of challenge some of the usual ways and look at different ways that we can kind of possibly kind of make improvements, or change direction, or look at anything to kind of take that in a slightly different direction. Which leads me on to celebrating your imperfections. I don't know if anybody out there is familiar with the term kintsugi. It's a Japanese art. I think it translates roughly as golden joinery. I think it's beautiful. I was at Frome Market the other day, and there was actually a stall that was selling their products that had been repaired with gold. So a fractured item, a fractured plate, had then been bonded back together, but the seams were celebrated with gold leaf, which to me kind of makes everything sort of so much more human, rather than seeking perfection, which we all know is not a reality, even though social media tries to make us believe that it is. Celebrating those cracks and the damage is really kind of quite a sort of humbling attribute. And Charlie Waller is somebody that really does kind of embrace that and works with that, and understands that mental health, you know, people think that it's you know, it's a dark issue, but the more that it's talked about, and the more that it's exposed, and the more that it's sort of not celebrated, but certainly sort of embraced, then it leads us to a better future for both the sufferer and the person that is guiding them through the process. Keeping a tidy house. Anybody that knows me, I wish that was my sock drawer. I'm not brave enough to wear socks of white, that colour, but it's really important with your brand to just keep everything kind of in order. And as humans, we do love routine, and it allows us to kind of understand where we fit into a brand, or where we can kind of connect, because we know that that repetition will keep coming around, so we can kind of jump into it. So newsletters going out regularly, social media posts being regular and consistent in quality and in visual brand styling, content clearly needs to be different and new and fresh, but to house it in a sort of framework of graphic assets that people can instantly recognize. If you think of things like Channel 4, their typeface, has been around a couple of years now, and immediately you only need to see a title in that typeface and you know that it's Channel 4, which then starts to mentally recall all of the values and the qualities of Channel 4, and you kind of know that it's likely to be, you know, a disruptive or a challenging or a from the heart kind of program. So therefore you then start to think, well, this relates to me, and you're halfway down the street then, and you kind of know that that's something that you'll want to kind of connect with. So joined up regular messaging in your voice, keeping that tone of voice very clear, very distinct, very recognizable as you. Think about your vocabulary, think about what you say and where you say it. All of that starts to feed into this tidy house and keeping everything kind of ordered. And also your logo clearly needs to be represented in a clear, distinct, and I always say, for kind of like, if it's a new rebrand, in the same position, rubber stamping it everywhere that you possibly can in the same colorway, so that what may feel like repetition to you, to your audience, they won't have seen it as many times as you. And I think it's something like you need 12 points of connection before you finally make a decision. I always find if I want to buy a book to go on holiday with, I'd see it on the bus, somebody else reading it, or I'd see it in the window of W.H. Smith's, or I'd see it on Amazon, or somebody else would mention, oh, I've just seen this, I've just read this book. So it's, and then finally you kind of go, oh, actually, life's kind of telling me I need to pay attention to this title as something that it wants me to kind of be aware of. So again, kind of listen to fate, or use fate to kind of guide that and to keep that kind of recognition going. And if you are going to break the rules, if you are going to step out of line from your brand styling, be very conscious of why you're doing it. I think you should do it, but you've got to use it sparingly. It's a little bit like seasoning. Too much and you've broken everything, and it will be overdone and you'll have lost the thread of the brand. But in little individual peppered kind of places, then it is good to do, and it does break from the norm, which then can gain you a little bit more kind of recognition or a little bit more awareness. So always be consistent, and by doing that, understand what you stand for, which people refer to as your promise, and know how you stand apart, which is what people refer to as your mission. And something that I work very closely with brands with is knowing how you stand out. So that's all about your identity, all about the sort of the graphic brand assets that build the whole story. And as I mentioned, Charlie Waller, here's a kind of perfect example of how they've remained consistent. And this was all put together within lockdown. Digital Wonder Lab were totally responsible for the digital elements, so website top left and middle, top middle, for the online and the mobile version. And then we've gone into fundraising, we've gone into a Friends of Charlie Waller initiative as well for donations. And with the brand, we realized that because they do deal a lot with children, then we needed to kind of soften the brand and keep it kind of quite illustrated and articulate as well, in the way that it sort of creates the whole story. So we created a whole range of icons, hand-drawn icons, which were unique to them, and a sort of brush stroke appeal as well. So they're speech marks, and the sort of two speech bubbles are overlaying each other, brings together the conversation of Charlie Waller, and then around that is layered the emotion and the attachments to the brand. So as you can see, even just using their two-color palette, it still creates quite a kind of vibrant visual, and can then be dialed up and dialed down according to where the brand is represented. So talking about balance, rational and emotion is really key. And this is all about, I mean, as a charity, you may think, oh, what we've got to explain is that you know, we deal with a disability and we have these resources and you can come and access them in this way, but always try and kind of connect that with an emotional hook. So for example, are you finding life difficult? Because then come and talk to us, because we may be able to help by offering you this. So it's balancing that rational side with your emotional side. Going back to the party that I talked about earlier, if you go up to somebody at that party and all you talk about is just the dry factual stuff, it's not a great relationship, it's not a great connection, and it doesn't really leave the audience feeling very enlightened or inspired. So if you were to come from the do you feel like this, or were you thinking this, or what feeling do you have about that, you can get the emotion into that, then it really does start to sort of tie everything together and keep everything connected. So with those emotions, you've got 6 to play with. And if anybody's seen Pixar, there's a brilliant film, Inside Out, which clearly is a sort of middle level aimed at children, but there is so many other levels to it as well. It's got a real sort of deep intellect to it, and without being a spoiler, it's actually sadness that wins the day. That's the feeling that's in the child's head. Sadness clearly doesn't think she has any sort of power, but through sadness comes happiness, and all of the other emotional attributes then sort of feed from that. And as I said, I won't spoil the film, but it's worth bearing that in mind. So you've got 6 emotions to play with, and they all have a purpose. They all have a worth in building a brand story. Toothpaste, for example, as a brand, is generally either sold on fear or happiness. If you use our toothpaste, if you don't use our toothpaste, then you may have gum disease, you may have bleeding, and your teeth may fall out. Or if you do use our toothpaste, then you may have the brightest, whitest smile with no tartar and no coloration, and you'll be desperately happy and beautiful. So a brand can kind of spin emotions in different ways, but they are, you know, they're what connect us and what we all have inherent. So it's worth dabbling in and sort of playing with to kind of keep your brand story as rich as possible. So we've talked about 6 emotions. You've also got 5 senses, and I worked with Picture Palace just before lockdown and for many years, and we had it's an international networking event that was held at St James's Palace and Buckingham Palace in London, and also around the world. So it had an international presence, and in all of the different places that Picture Palace was ever presented, we always considered food, print, lapel badges, video, animation, interactive opportunities for people to take selfies or do their own video, or produce mini interactions with different elements. So down at the bottom there, there's biscuits that were in the shape of the logo that you could eat, and we also had fish and chips. I remember one night. So one of my pleasures was actually eating my own brand, which I don't think I've ever done with any other brand that I've worked on. But just connecting with sight, sound, smell, touch, taste, and then always remember feeling as well. So for me, it's just that kind of essence of, oh, this feels nice, or that's my sort of place. Or I always love it when I kind of work with a new client and they go, oh my God, how did you get, that's exactly me. That's, you know, and tears are brought on, which is always, you know, such a wonderful experience to think that you've kind of tapped into that level of a client, or what I like to call a sort of creative relationship, where I've fully understood who they are or what they need to do, and being able to represent that in pixels and print and biscuits and lanyards and animation and film and physical events and all of that, to bring the whole kind of story together. So one other thing, we've talked about your 6 emotions, and you've got your 5 senses as well. But Desmond Morris, back in 1967, studied I think they're called a family of apes, and he discovered 9 what I call behavior fundamentals, and these are used very closely with brands. So I invite you, it's a little game that you can play now. You've got 9 on the screen now: sex, prestige, health, curiosity, power, tribalism, parenthood, winning, and protection. And as I said, brands tend to warm to one of these, and what I find is it kind of works in 3s, because there's always the power of 3. So as a brand, as a charity brand, I invite you to select 3 of these, choosing 1 as your sort of top of the tree behavior fundamental, and then 2 in support. And those 3 can then rotate. So you can pivot 1 round to the top, but they'll always two others will be in support. And to just put a bit more sort of story behind that, to give you an idea, these are some of the brands that use those fundamentals. So Dolce & Gabbana sell their products generally around sort of sex as its sort of pinnacle. Tiffany & Co. use prestige. Airbnb use tribalism, bringing together sort of communities. Nike very obviously use winning. But then for Nike, I'd say that they also use health and possibly tribalism. I mean, this isn't set in stone, but it's kind of a useful way to just, and I always kind of, when I do run a sort of brand workshop as well, invite others to within the team to put forward what they are. So you can do a sort of straw poll of everybody's thoughts, but you can think quite laterally as well. So parenthood, for example, there's Volvo, but it doesn't mean to say you have to be a mother or father. It just means that maybe you're sort of quite nurturing, or you are sort of educate and care for and are considerate to, or sort of guide somebody up through the sort of path of life. And curiosity clearly can kind of be in several different kind of areas as well. Power is a tricky one, and people tend to sort of shy away from that, but I always kind of admire anybody that does think that power is one of their sort of strong ones, because it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be overtly strong. Power can come from being kind of quite gentle as well. So Charlie Waller, for example, they chose throughout the whole team and everybody that we interviewed, parenthood, protection, and curiosity. And curiosity was a lovely one because that allowed us the opportunity to really sort of open up their narrative and kind of keep the space kind of wider. So that brings me to the sort of not too bad actually, 5:30. So we're about halfway through, and if anybody has any questions that they want to ask, then I'm more than happy to answer those questions now if Anita pops back, or I think there's a couple in the chat. I'm just gonna skip through. Lucy Payne, nice to see your comments. Yes, I definitely think we all still buy people and stories. Lovely, and you agree as well that so many companies try to talk to everyone. So yeah, I totally agree. It's worth just kind of keeping your niche kind of quite small.
Well, there's lots of chatting going on, but no particular questions. So one design thing that always bugs me when I'm laying out pages for my magazine or popping stuff on a website or those kind of things, I'm quite regularly sent logos and brand identities and things. And quite often it seems that so many brands don't think about how their logo is going to be used. So it can be that it's long and it fits along a page. Well, actually, if it's going on atop of a business card, perhaps that might work fine, but positioning somewhere else, that might not work. And it's too long and it needs to be slightly more boxy. How do you work with businesses like that or charities like that, Robin, to try and get them to think about how their brand is being used and how it's then visualized?
I would suggest if it has physical constraints like that, and certain colors as well don't work well, or you can't reverse them out, or they have been reversed out, I find is a massive problem where it's already sort of been boxed in, and then when you place it next to, and charities tend to have to work a lot with other brands as well. They'll sit in environments where they're part of an expo like this, so great opportunity to go to some of the booths and just have a look at some of how those brands have worked. One in particular, We Get It, I think they've got a gorgeous brand, but then I'm totally biased, but I think it is, and this, pretend I'm not saying this, but you really do need to work with a brand professional who will think forward and plan all of that for you if they have done their job properly. So they will have considered that your logo can work in single color, because the likelihood of you want it on a pen or a tote bag or embroidered onto a t-shirt, if it's a charity that needs to be supported through fundraising. So that's really important. That the typography is not too fine and it can withstand at a small size. And then also thinking about how it's used as the avatar as well on their social media is really key, because you're down to a tiny little circle and you're up against a lot of other kind of competing brands in other spaces as well. You're not just in your own sort of little charity sphere. So all of those things are all considered when you put together a brand. And after this short break here, I'll run through Charlie Waller and Cerebral Palsy Cymru and just show you what they came from and to, because those were the two considerations of, they'd been produced by a family friend way back when the charity was first set up. So if you think about as with We Get It, and with Laura, who I'll be talking to tomorrow at this very time, 5 to 6 o'clock, where that was one of the considerations where we had to think, how are you going to be perceived? How are we going to build a brand? Saying goodbye to my builders. How are you going to build a brand that people are going to instantly recognize? It's going to start to kind of feed some of those brand personalities that you want to put forward. They wanted to be quite a sassy kind of brand. They didn't want to be too old school or sort of narrowed into a sort of a niche that they didn't feel was kind of relevant to them. So yeah, all of that needs to kind of, I'm rambling. All of that really needs to be considered when you're building a brand from scratch, or consider a rebrand or a refresh. It doesn't have to be the whole thing. It might just be color tweaks or typographic tweaks that will then allow you to be a little bit more usable.
Sometimes it's those small tweaks as well that can make such a difference. So words, instead of them going along the page, they go round in a circle.
Yeah.
Just playing with it a bit, and it just freshens up the brand, or injecting a new colour. There are just a few small things that do make a huge difference. We've got a question, which is, do charities understand the power of brand, and how do you help them justify the investment?
I think most charities do now, and even more so. Certainly in this last year, every charity that I've connected with has come because they know that they can't sit still. They can't just work with what they had. They're not standing out from the crowd. People aren't understanding who they are. And they also felt that they didn't look worthy. They looked a little bit kind of village hall kind of standard of charity, and they're not. I mean, as soon as I sort of step through the gates and start to get to know them and get as close as I possibly can, then I realize, my goodness, you're such an incredible entity and people need to know about you. So that's when I get excited and think, I've got to help you. What can I do? So getting them to understand and justify the investment really does tend to be a sort of trustee board. But with Charlie Waller in particular, we did a very slow journey and were always observant of the journey that had taken them to where they were now, and to look at the cost and the investment that they needed. And I hope I can talk honestly here. I always look to give the most value. So it's not just here's the logo, it's here's how it can be expressed, and here's how social media can be put together. And then I tend to stay with the creative team for a couple of weeks or months, or with Charlie Waller, I've stayed with them all the way through to kind of just offer guidance so that mistakes don't happen too soon, and then the investment, the value of what they've created really can be kind of expressed. So I think in a nutshell, it's worth understanding it's not just a brand identity, it's building a brand, which is why I refer to it as the brand story.
Yeah. I think one of the issues as well is nowadays there are so many people doing different parts of the marketing mix. So we have the social media mix, and we're using multiple platforms, and you may have a number of people in an organization that are using those credentials to log in and to update things, that all of a sudden they can decide on their own backs that they want to cut a tagline, for example, off the bottom of a logo, and it's, no, what have you done to the brand? If it's supposed to be like that, we've lost that now. And that's when I think it is really important that someone like you monitors kind of what's going on for a while, just to make sure that the brand is staying the way it was intended and that you'd worked so hard with the charity to create.
Yeah, it's paying respect to that early concentration of time, and something I offer is a sort of brand custodian, which is exactly that. Sometimes it is just, what do you think? Does this work? Is it on brand? And I am quite kind of particular, back to the sort of keep a tidy house, like you may think that that's the wrong font now, or that's the wrong color, or that's not the vocabulary that we would generally use, it's the wrong tone of voice, or you're presenting yourself in the wrong place. Your audience are never going to see you over there. Somebody just mentioned there, how can charities use social media more to engage with their supporters? And I think it's exactly that. I mentioned earlier, it's using social media to educate, to inspire, and to entertain, and to use video, and to use narrative, and to use things like statistics or sort of reference material that people can access in different ways. So the more you relate to your audience, the more you give them food that they want to feed off, that's how you'll engage, because then they'll keep coming, they'll follow you, they'll share you, and then your community grows. Don't think that you have to hit everybody, and also go and talk to others find what other people are saying within your sphere. So if it's cerebral palsy, then kind of go and look what other groups are saying and connect with them and invite yourself to their dinner party, invite yourself to their group and say, can I kind of say this or say that or learn from that, and it's connections. It's more around that.
And I think through lockdown as well, more than ever, it's become quite apparent that we have so many donors with charities, that they're used to giving in a certain way, whether that's regular giving or giving through certain, say, events. And we've quite often got an aging demographic that support these charities, and quite often we're trying to attract a new demographic, and how that can be achieved. And I know lots of local charities have embraced new ways through lockdowns, like game-a-thons and things like that. But that's when we really do need to look at the brand and how it's used and how it's connecting with that different demographic.
And connecting with corporates as well. So if you connect, I worked with Meals on Wheels San Francisco, and they were very strong at connecting with all of the big techs like Twitter, Facebook, and all the other kind of big companies that are out there, and inviting their employees to come and give back to the city that they'd kind of stepped into. So they used to have volunteer days where then people would come along and sort of connect. So then you've got that kind of young crowd who then really do understand. And once you're connected with a charity, you rarely kind of let go of them. If it's something that touches your heart, then you'll stay with them and you'll do all that you can. So you'll do your walkies for wellbeing, or you'll do your sort of mental health week and kind of fundraising, or whatever it's going to be. Conscious of time, shall I jump to the second half, and we'll see if we can grab some more questions towards the end? I don't want to eat into everybody's tea time.
Yeah,
All right, I shall fire on. I'll try and keep this second second quarter now a little bit briefer. So I won't go into too much detail on this, because I do invite you to join me again tomorrow night, and I'm actually going to be here with Laura, who was the founder, or is the founder of, they're now called We Get It, but they were called Eat Move Glow, which is the story that we'll explain tomorrow, and how Eat Move Glow turned into We Get It, which is a very sassy cancer support community based in Bath, and they had to take everything online last year. They used to run events which are coming back, and I know that they've got their first in-person get-together on the 24th of September, I believe, on the Friday, which is at Holborn Museum, which will be a coffee and the opportunity for people to connect and meet and actually see each other again, which is something that is really key to their community. So We Get It really do understand their audience, and they do try to kind of bring everything to that community as best they can. So Bobath, which is now Cerebral Palsy Cymru, that's what they used to look like. And as Anita just said, that logo was causing them problems. People didn't understand what the word Bobath meant. It is actually a type of therapy. It's a type of cerebral palsy therapy. But logo-wise, it didn't work at small sizes. It couldn't be reversed out and things like that. So they decided they wanted a rebrand and a rename. And I worked very closely with Digital Wonder Lab to bring that to life. They did it digitally and I did it from a brand perspective. And that's now what they look like. And that's how we've started to kind of build the brand out as well. These tangrams, which make up the heart within the logo, can then be expressed in different ways. They can create different elements, rockets, little children on rocking horses, playing, rabbits, butterflies, and it's really given us a very expressive brand. And then bottom left was a fundraising initiative that they're going to run annually, which is Cake and Tea for CP, because it used to be Baking for Bobath, so we had to kind of try and get some alliteration in there, but the team came up with that. So we've got glorious gingham bunting and teapots made from the tangram. So that's where the sort of the whole creative experience really starts to grow, and we can start to kind of expand the brand and really sort of take it out to market. So forwards, just to summarize towards the end now, talked about this already. Try and think about who you relate to, how will they remember you, and where will you be retold. So that's through everything, through film, through narrative, through animation, through social media, through one-to-ones, through expos. Every time you kind of you connect with people, then just try and think about those 3 words. Love, it's a really free element that you can bring to your brand. If you love your story and if you believe in it, it'll cost you absolutely nothing, and I promise you your audience will embrace that, and they will connect with that, and they will relate to that, and that's how you will move forward. Loyalty is all about your audience, sharing your ideas, listening to them, think about what they're saying, or hear what they're saying and think about what they've said, and acknowledge your mistakes. That one was real, so I threw a little emoji in there classically. But yeah, acknowledge what you do wrong and apologize, learn from it and move on. And through that, you will then become a legend, I promise, because we all want to be that brand that is there long after we've gone. So make your promise, keep it simple, and spark joy is a lovely thing. And there's not a lot of it around at the moment. So whenever you can find it, embrace it as much as you can and spread the word. And something I'll leave you with, nothing great was ever achieved without enthusiasm. It's something we have to dig deep for sometimes, but if you don't have it and you don't bring that to your brand, it's not really going to go that far. So enthusiasm is a lovely thing to instill into your brand and inject into everything that you possibly do. So I can now open can't speak, it's getting to the end of the day. Open up the arena to anybody that's got any further questions before we finally close up today. But also I'd like to offer you the opportunity, if anybody would like an hour of my time for free. If you're a charity and you've got a burning question, then do get in touch. hello@rednine.co.uk, and I've got a little 7 steps to building your brand story PDF that I can share with you. And even if you don't want to talk, I can send that one off. So just connect on email and I'll very happily send you that PDF. And it's got some of the information that I've shared with you today, and a little bit about some of the case studies. So more than happy to share that. Any questions? Do we have anything more?
Just everyone saying it was really insightful and you obviously love what you do.
There's the enthusiasm bit and a little bit of joy.
Yeah. So Robin, when did you realise that you wanted to be a designer?
Oh, blimey, I've no idea. Scribbling at school with crayons, I guess. I don't know. I think creativity has always been part of my life. I've always loved drawing and painting and anything photography and travel. And I think brand for me is always really daunting. I always thought it was something that the big boys did, and then just kind of fell into it, I guess. And the more you do, the more you love, and the more you kind of find yourself. And the charity clients or the charity creative relationships that I've worked with have just grown and grown. And that, for me, I've now realized that the way that I work suits that audience. So I kind of practice what I preach, really. I've found people that I love to make a difference for, and it's just very humbling to, you know, there's always been tears at the end of projects or halfway through where you just know that you're really kind of doing something that that changes people's lives. And I know that's, I hope that doesn't sound overtly fluffy, but I do mean it. It's, you know, there's just, they're good friends, and now the people that I work with, and I care about them, and I think that connection benefits them and me and their brand and the creative kind of entities that we put together.
I think your authenticity is clear, and during lockdown we did an AM to PM through lockdown with Robin, and it was one of our most read, and I think it was because you were completely honest, and you told us what you were doing in your spare time. I think you were doodling and designing and things on an app, and I can't remember which one it was now because it's been so many months since, but I did download the app that you mentioned, and I started.
I can't recommend Procreate enough. It's brilliant. Anywhere. Yeah, you can sit anywhere. But I mean, I'll talk honestly now. I found this latter period tough, and I'm sure everybody else is. And I need to, you and I spoke just prior to this, just kind of, I don't know what, well, I kind of have my theory of why it's tough, but it is. And I think you just have to be honest about that. And, you know, when people don't respond to emails, which happens a lot now, people aren't as responsive or kind of answer back your questions as quickly as life used to be. It used to be quite frenetic, and now it's just a bit of a slower pace. And not everything goes through, not everything kind of gets answered or put into place. And I think you just have to kind of go with what you've got and not panic about what you don't have or didn't have. And that honesty kind of really does sort of help, I think. Definitely.
I think we've all worked so hard that now it's easier. It's that it's not as easy as it was. We managed to find a way to build momentum before and have one another's backs and support one another, and I think now we're trying to get back to it, and things are getting busier, and life is getting, I think we're tired, aren't we? That's it, where we've had to keep.
I think there's a level of tiredness, yeah, and I just think it's kind of like we don't quite know what's ahead, so therefore people are reserved about planning because they don't want to fall flat again. So, you know, it's like you're told you can go and run a race, but you don't know if you'll get past the first hurdle, so why bother? But you kind of just have to walk up to the first hurdle and just be helped over it. And that's kind of where I step in. It's like, look, I'll just get you over the first hurdle, and then we'll stop and we'll breathe, and then we'll decide, do we go further? That's the conversations that we have with Charlie. You know, we had big plans to do a film, but with lockdown, we couldn't get in front of people. So we're looking at animation, or we're looking at just Park It just now. And they've just had a massive mental health conference online, which I think they struggled with to kind of get bums on seats. But as I explained, you know, but even if it was 10 people, which it wasn't, it was way more, but, you know, that's 10 new people that now know about you. And so that's a step forward. It might just be a little baby step, but it's enough.
Definitely. And I think during times of innovation, it's always harder as well. And I feel that I've been running my business for 8 years. And more than anything, in the last year, we've had to find new ways of doing things the whole time. And when you're using your brain that hard to find new ways of doing things,
it's really exhausting. You know what? I'm going to go. I've got a glass of wine waiting in the fridge, and after this hour of chit chat, it's kind of like, yeah, it's well earned. And it's a school night. I wouldn't normally do it.
Oh, it's a treat. Oh, well, I'm really looking forward to having you and Laura on tomorrow.
Oh, she's a giggle. I hope she's got her killer heels on. She's an absolute demon. She's lovely.
Well, we needed to get her shoes on this stage. She'll have to pull her foot up from under her desk.
We'll do that. We just have to ask if she'll do that.
Oh, brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time, Robin.
Not at all.
I've seen in the chat that we've already got somebody who would love to take you up on and offer. So, yeah, that's brilliant. Well, lovely to see you all this evening, folks. Thanks again, Robin. And Robin's profile is set up as a presenter within Hopin. So if you click on there, you can connect with him on LinkedIn, but his details are obviously up on screen as well to send an email. So do get connected. All right, have a fab evening, everyone. I think I might find some wine too.
Good stuff. Take care, everybody. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.